The universe remembers beginnings differently than mortals do. Where humans trace lines of cause and effect, where storytellers build arcs out of motives and consequences, there are older instruments that read meaning itself as a thing to be plucked, tuned, and broken. The All-Black Necro did not begin as a sword in the hands of a god. It began as a decision, an answer to a question older than worship. What do you do when the cosmos gives you gods who rule by accident, by appetite, by the slow accumulation of power? The Necro is the answer that corrupted divinity into strategy. It was forged in a time when a being who made symbiotes of shadow sought a solution for the problem of unchecked divinity. Take the concept of God and make it consumable. Fashioned from a darkness that preceded language, the Necro learns any name, any claim, and eats the predicate that holds that name upright. Where gods are built of stories, the blade is an excision. Saitama, by contrast, was a counterexample in narrative form, an experiment in absurdity. He exists to break escalation, a meta-joke given a human frame, training until his limits evaporated, becoming a force that the plot cannot touch. His punches are not mere force. They are the narrative end of conflict. They end fights because the story requires an end. His universe privileges closure over complication. That is his power and his philosophical vulnerability. He is a being whose ontology is secured by the implicit agreement between author and reader. Something that resists escalation can be ended by a single, perfectly framed action. The stage between these two tendencies is not merely physical, it is metaphysical. On one side sits annihilation through negation, the Necro, which consumes predicates and reduces titles to husks. On the other sits an implacable reductive humor, the Saitama principle, which collapses complexity into one decisive moment. Both are methods of closure, one by erasure, the other by finalization. The question that frames their conflict is therefore not who hits harder, but which model of ending can outend the other. To understand why the Necro might claim victory, you must see it not as a stronger fist, but as a different grammar. Where Saitama's punch presumes a continuity of causality that ends in force, the Necro presumes that meaning itself can be excised, that the predicate's binding identity can be unmade. If Saitama's invincibility is an article in the ledger of narrative law, if his punch is contractual, then the Necro is an instrument capable of rewriting contracts at the ontological level. The sword's history shows it eating gods, by nullifying what they are, their names, their claims, the reason worship clings to them. That is why poets and theologians who think in abstractions will whisper that the Necro is not merely powerful, it is surgical. When a god takes the Necro, the blade's hunger entwines with the mind and learns to weaponize the philosophical. It attacks not only flesh, but the justification for that flesh's existence. Against a titan whose immortality is authored, the Necro becomes the editorial mark that deletes a paragraph and thereby negates the scene. Saitama's universe laughs at escalation because escalation presumes stakes. The Necro denies stakes by erasing the categories that make stakes meaningful. That is the clever, dangerous pivot the opening moments increasingly reveal. This will not be only a contest of bodies. It will be an argument waged in the raw currency of being. Whoever controls definition will, in a very real sense, win. The air before the collision is thick with metaphors, ash and ink. A battleground where neither blade nor fist alone will record the last line. Each combatant arrives carrying a promise. One that says, I finish fights. The other that says, I unmake the condition that allows you to be finished. Philosophers will say that such a duel asks, is the end of a thing equivalent to the erasure of its name? Or can a single decisive act of force close a book, even if that book's spine is being devoured? The answer will be written in violence, yes, but also in logic. The Necro does not merely want blood. It wants the silence that follows when language has been pulled out of a throat. That is why its winning is plausible, and why the world leans forward to watch the first blow. Now the battle. The first contact is almost disappointingly simple. Saitama's step. A clean line, the centrifugal simplicity of the punch that has never failed. He moves like an end. The world anticipates closure. The wielder of the Necro, call him a god in the old tongue, but know that in truth he is a vessel, steps into that arc with the calm of one who has consumed suns. The blade is a black mouth that opens and speaks without sound. It names. The first time Saitama's fist connects, it collides with a living absence. Flesh yields, yes. Muscle ruptures, and for a heartbeat the punch lands as it always has, perfect final. But the Necro does not feel pain. It feels predicates. It stretches like a shadow around Saitama's arm and tastes the simple promise that upholds the punch. This ends. When the blade tastes that predicate, it starts to eat outward. The world stutters, sound loses context, motion becomes unlinked from intent. The Necro does not blast Saitama with a force that exceeds his strength. It rewrites the sentence in which Saitama exists. Memories unspool at the edges. Scenes he has always known. His training, his friends, the faces of opponents filter into the blade's hunger and become grammars to be unmade. Each strike the sword parries is an editorial deletion. Each construct it spits forth is a library of cancelled possibilities. Saitama punches on instinct. The universe has taught him fists finish. But the Necro intercepts that instinct and asks the deeper question, what makes a punch an ending? The battlefield becomes epistemological. Spectators, if anything can be said to be spectator to such metaphysical violence, feel the world redefining itself. A punch that used to end battle now finds itself passing through a substance that no longer answers to end. The Necro proliferates symbiotic tendrils that do not simply heal the wielder. They globalize his concept of negation. They infect the causal chain that runs from intent to consequence. Saitama's hits become increasingly anachronistic. They are strong, devastating in all local measures, but their effect on the fabric of what counts as finished is blunted. Where once his punch rearranged matter, now it must contend with a blade that eats the sentence that names that matter's endpoint. There is wrestling in the middle of the fight, where muscle and meme tangle. Saitama adapts. He always adapts. Physical escalation is his reliable reply. He throws a sequence of blows that would crumble mountains, each landing with cataclysmic physicality. For a few heartbeats, the world believes he will win the old way. Force displaces function. A body collapses. But the Necro refuses to be displaced. It wraps around the air, around motive, and in doing so it unmoors Saitama's signature property, the contract that guarantees a narrative closure. The sword's most dangerous trick is not in damage, but in reinterpretation. It creates counter-narratives, small, insidious myths that grow, like rust, arguing that an end is not necessarily a cessation of being, but the erasure of claim. It whispers to witnesses that Saitama's punch is no longer sufficient, because the category victory has been consumed. At the apex, Saitama executes what should be the terminal strike, a blow intended to fold the battlefield into silence. The fist moves with the geometry of an axiom. It meets the Necro not as a wave meets a wall, but as a theorem confronted by a negation that invalidates its premise. The blade severs the reference point in Saitama's ontology, his authorship if you will, by creating a node of unbeing within the sphere that the punch would have closed. That node expands, a black lattice that is not emptiness, but a topology of absence, reclassifying the punch from final to incomplete by removing the criterion of finality. Saitama feels the world press against an absence. This is not a blow that breaks him in the way training did not prevent. This is a fracture in the agreement that made his existence definitive. He fights with the same honesty he has always fought, straightforward, relentless, human in its simplicity. But the Necro has been fighting for an older syllogism: destroy the premises. It does so not by brute force, but by undermining the category that allows brute force to mean anything. As the field collapses into this argument, the blade unravels the traces of Saitama's narrative immunity, and in that unraveling, the physical certainty of his punch becomes epistemologically meaningless. When the dust settles, the body of Saitama is not a heap of ash in a clear tableau of defeat. Rather, the world remembers him with a gap where his finality used to be. Stories that spoke of one punch find a qualifier added by the Necro's contagion. Once, there was a being who ended fights in a single strike, until there was a thing that could delete the predicate, end. The Necro's victory is not merely that Saitama is felled. It is that the concept that made Saitama invincible is annulled in the theater of being. By the last line, the blade stands, not because it struck harder, but because it eradicated the ontological currency that counted Saitama's fists as world-enders. This is a bitter victory for those who love the simple heroism of decisive blows. It is also philosophically coherent within the duel's terms. If victory is about controlling the conditions that define winners, then the Necro, the instrument that consumes definitions, wins by design. Saitama fought nobly, with breathtaking physical purity, and in any bounded physical metric, his blows would deserve the word victory. But the Necro plays a different game. It wins by rewriting the very ledger that would tally victories. The final image is a black blade humming in a silence the world never had a name for before, an absence that, paradoxically, announces itself as the last word.